The translator's gambit. Nikolai Voss had spent his entire diplomatic career learning to read faces. Human faces, with their familiar expressions and micro-gestures. Avian faces from the Procyon system, with their feathered crests that flared with emotion. Even the gelatinous visages of the Morcellian collective, which rippled with bioluminescent patterns when they felt strongly about treaty provisions. But nothing had prepared him for the complete absence of a face. Neural activity spiking, whispered Pax, the AI assistant in his earpiece. Might want to control that. Nikolai inhaled slowly, letting his racing thoughts settle as he stood before the Sphyran ambassador. The being stood nearly 2 meters tall, its body composed entirely of interlocking crystalline fragments that caught the light from the viewport and scattered it in patterns across the diplomatic chamber. Where a head should have been, there was simply an elaborate arrangement of prismatic structures that occasionally shifted and realigned with a soft chiming sound. Ambassador Thelsia, Nikolai said, pronouncing the name with careful precision, on behalf of the Terran coalition, I welcome you aboard the Concorde. The crystalline figure remained motionless for several seconds. Then, without warning, the fragments at its center parted slightly, revealing a pulsing core of blue-white light. The concept of welcome is understood, came a voice that seemed to emanate not from the creature but from the very air around them, vibrating with harmonic overtones. Though your species' preoccupation with verbal greeting rituals remains curious. Nikolai maintained his diplomatic smile. The briefings had warned him that the Sphyra considered spoken language inefficient, preferring instead to communicate through light patterns and vibration. The translation interface was doing its best, but nuance was inevitably lost. Different methods of connection are what make this galaxy so fascinating, he replied smoothly. I understand this is your first direct interaction with humans. The crystalline fragments near what Nikolai assumed was the creature's top section rotated slightly. First official diplomatic interaction, Thelsia corrected. We have observed your kind for decades. Your transmissions are noisy. I hope not unpleasantly so. Pleasantness is subjective. Your species expends considerable energy on emotional declarations. It is inefficient but not without pattern. Behind Nikolai, the door to the diplomatic chamber hissed open. Dr. Eleanor Park, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, entered with a cart bearing several containers. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly upon seeing the Sphyran, but her voice remained steady. The environmental samples you requested, Ambassador, she said, positioning the cart beside Thelsia. The crystalline being tilted toward the samples, fragments shifting to create what looked like a prismatic hand that hovered over the containers without touching them. Your atmosphere components are being analyzed, Thelsia announced. The proportion of nitrogen is higher than optimal for long-term Sphyran presence. We can adjust environmental controls for future meetings, Nikolai offered. Our ship is designed for adaptive accommodation. Unnecessary adjustment. My crystalline structure can compensate temporarily. The being's core pulsed brighter for a moment. But the gesture of modification is noted as diplomatically significant. Eleanor shot Nikolai a glance that he recognized immediately, professional excitement barely contained. He nodded minutely, giving her permission to engage. Ambassador, she ventured, our records show that Sphyran physiology processes light as a primary nutrient source. Would you prefer if we increased the UV spectrum in this chamber? The crystalline form shifted, fragments realigning in a cascade that produced a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Nikolai realized with a start that this might be laughter, or something analogous. Your research is thorough but incomplete, Thelsia replied. We metabolize specific frequencies that vary by individual. My particular resonance requires wavelengths closer to what you term infrared than ultraviolet. Eleanor's face lit up. Fascinating. So each Sphyran has a unique spectral signature for energy consumption. Like a metabolic fingerprint. Your metaphor is imprecise but the concept is correct. Nikolai watched the exchange with careful attention. These small cultural interactions often revealed more than formal negotiations ever could. The Spira had reached out after centuries of isolation, and nobody quite understood why. Their civilization was ancient, predating human spaceflight by millennia, and they controlled resource-rich systems that the Coalition had long coveted but never dared approach. Perhaps, Nikolai suggested, we might discuss the purpose of your visit. Your transmission mentioned mutual interests, but was deliberately vague on specifics. The crystalline being's fragments stilled, becoming almost completely motionless except for the pulsing core at its center. Purpose requires context, Thelsia said after a pause that stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. And context requires understanding. You believe we have come to negotiate territory or resources. This is incorrect. Eleanor and Nikolai exchanged glances. Then what brings you to us? Nikolai asked carefully. Resonance. Your species produces it unintentionally. It has implications. Pax's voice whispered in Nikolai's ear again. That last statement set off every ambiguity flag in the translation matrix. Proceed with caution. I'm afraid I don't understand, Nikolai admitted. Thelsia's crystalline structure began to rotate slowly, fragments shifting in what appeared to be a complex pattern. The blue-white light at its core intensified. Understanding is not immediate. It requires proximity. Observation. Time. The being moved closer to Nikolai, who resisted the instinct to step back. Your emotional states create vibrations. These vibrations travel through space in ways your science has not detected. Eleanor leaned forward, fascination overriding protocol. You can sense emotional states as physical phenomena. Your emotions are physical phenomena, Thelsia corrected. The separation you perceive is illusory. Humans radiate constantly. Most species do. But yours. Yours resonates with ancient frequencies that have been silent for eons. Nikolai felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. And this resonance, it's why you've broken your isolation after all this time. Yes. Your species unintentionally awakens aspects of reality that should remain dormant. Is that a threat? The words escaped before Nikolai could modulate his tone. The crystalline being's fragments shifted rapidly, creating a discordant chiming sound. Threat assessment is premature, Thelsia replied. We have not determined if the resonance is harmful or beneficial. Only that it exists and intensifies as your population expands. Eleanor stepped forward. Ambassador, could you demonstrate what you mean by resonance? Perhaps with a controlled example. Thelsia rotated toward her. Demonstration carries risk. But perhaps a limited expression. Without warning, the blue-white core at the center of Thelsia's crystalline form flared brilliantly. The fragments around it began to vibrate, producing a harmonic tone that started just at the edge of hearing and quickly built in complexity and volume. Nikolai felt it first as pressure against his eardrums, then as a strange sensation in his chest, as if something was tugging gently at his sternum. Eleanor gasped beside him, her hand flying to her throat. And then, unexpectedly, Nikolai felt a wave of emotion that was not his own, a vast, cool curiosity tinged with something like apprehension, layered over a foundation of ancient patience so profound it made his human lifespan seem like the blink of an eye. This, Thelsia's voice came, somehow both inside and outside Nikolai's head, is rudimentary resonance. Your species produces this continuously, without control or awareness. The sensation faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Nikolai slightly dizzy. Eleanor was breathing heavily, her eyes wide. That was, she began. Direct empathic transfer, Nikolai finished, his diplomatic training reasserting itself despite his shock. A rather intimate gesture among my people, Ambassador. Intimacy is a cultural construct, Thelsia replied, fragments settling into their previous configuration. What you experienced was greatly attenuated. The actual resonance your species produces extends across greater distances and carries greater information. Nikolai straightened his uniform jacket, a habit that helped him regain composure. And this information concerns you? It has awakened interest among those who have slept. Interest is not always benevolent. Those who have slept. Eleanor asked. Other species? Entities. Presences. Ancient and patient. Thelsia's core dimmed slightly. Some would consume what resonates. Others would study it. We Sphira would prefer to moderate the interaction. You're saying, Nikolai said slowly, feeling his way through the implications, that human emotional outputs are attracting attention from beings we're not aware of. And you're offering to, what? Protect us. Shield us. Protection implies capacity for defense. That remains undetermined. Thelsia's fragments shifted again. We offer knowledge. Partnership. The possibility of preparation. For what? For contact of a kind your species cannot currently comprehend. Pax whispered in Nikolai's ear, recommend pressing for specifics while maintaining openness. This could be the real reason for first contact. Nikolai nodded slightly. Ambassador Thelsia, your warning, if that's what it is, seems both urgent and vague. If there's genuine danger to humanity, we need to understand it clearly. The crystalline being's fragments realigned into a configuration Nikolai hadn't seen before, more compact and somehow more formal. Understanding requires exchange, Thelsia said. We propose an embassy. Not of structures or territories, but of minds. One of yours to learn our ways. One of ours to study your resonance patterns directly. An exchange program? Nikolai clarified, surprised by the conventional nature of the request. Of consciousness, Thelsia corrected. Your language lacks precision. We seek to blend awareness temporarily. To create shared understanding where words fail. Eleanor's scientific enthusiasm was palpable. You mean a neural link? Mind-to-mind contact. More intimate. More complete. But yes, your approximation is functionally close. Nikolai felt the weight of the moment. This was far beyond his authority to negotiate, yet he sensed the opportunity slipping away if he delayed. Ambassador, he said carefully, such an arrangement would require extensive consultation with my superiors. And volunteers. Time flows differently for Sphira, Thelsia replied, but even we recognize urgency when appropriate. The resonance grows stronger. Those who listen grow more attentive. Your species continues, oblivious to the attention it draws. How long do we have? The crystalline being's core pulsed once, brightly. To use your temporal reference, the stars have not yet changed position significantly since we first detected your resonance. They may complete one cycle before consequences manifest. Nikolai translated mentally, years, possibly decades. Not immediate peril, but soon enough on a cosmic scale. I will convey your proposal with the urgency it deserves, he promised. In the meantime, perhaps we can establish regular communications too. I will remain, Thelsia interrupted. Aboard your vessel. As a gesture of our commitment to this exchange. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. Nikolai managed to maintain his composure, though his mind raced through security protocols and diplomatic precedents. That's unexpected, Ambassador. Our accommodations may not be suitable for your physiology. Adaptation is possible. Necessary, even. The crystalline being shifted, fragments spreading slightly as if in a gesture of openness. Consider it your first lesson in resonance, Diplomat Voss. Sometimes harmony requires proximity, even when it creates discomfort. As Nikolai looked at the alien being, faceless, emotionless by human standards, yet somehow communicating an intensity of purpose that transcended cultural barriers, he realized that this was why he had joined the diplomatic corps. Not for the comfortable negotiations between known quantities, but for moments like this, standing at the edge of human understanding, peering into the vast unknown. Welcome aboard the Concorde, Ambassador Thelsia, he said again, but this time with new meaning. It seems we have much to learn from each other. The crystalline being's core brightened in what Nikolai would later come to recognize as approval. Yes, Felsia agreed, beginning with the nature of resonance. And what awakens when it calls across the void? Unspoken frequencies. Dr. Lyra Okafor pressed her fingertips against the observation window, the reinforced glass cool beneath her touch. Beyond the transparent barrier, the meridian moved like a living symphony, its body a tapestry of translucent membranes that rippled with patterns of light. The being had no visible limbs, just undulating tissues and fibers that expanded and contracted with mesmerizing rhythm. "Are you recording these harmonic patterns, Dr. Okafor?" asked Commander Winters from the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded without turning. "Every frequency. But the equipment only captures half the story." She tapped her temple. "The rest is happening in here." The research station orbiting Meridia Prime had been her home for 6 months now. 6 months of cataloging vibrations, of documenting the intricate symphony of sounds too subtle for most humans to detect. 6 months of learning to listen with more than just her ears. The meridians communicated entirely through vibrational patterns, not sound waves as humans understood them, but complex oscillations that traveled through any medium, air, water, solid surfaces, even the electromagnetic field itself. Their language had no words, no grammar, only intentions shaped by resonant frequencies. "The Council needs your preliminary report by tomorrow," Winters reminded her. "They're getting impatient with the lack of concrete progress." Lyra finally turned from the window, fixing the commander with a steady gaze. At 43, she had long stopped caring about military protocol or political expectations. The silver streaks in her dark hair matched the determination in her eyes. "Tell the Council that xenolinguistics doesn't operate on their schedule," she said. "The meridians are teaching us to listen in entirely new ways. That takes time." Winters sighed. "Just give them something, Lyra. Anything to justify the funding for this station." After he left, Lyra returned her attention to the meridian in the observation chamber. This particular individual had been introduced to her as Vrel, though that was merely the closest human approximation of the harmonic signature that identified them among their kind. Vrel had volunteered as a cultural attaché, the first meridian willing to spend extended periods in the human research station. Their body now shifted, membranes folding into new configurations that sent cascades of bioluminescence rippling outward from their core. Lyra felt it before she heard it, a gentle pressure behind her sternum, almost like the moment before a sob or a laugh. Then came the vibration, so subtle that most of her colleagues missed it entirely, a tremulous overtone that made the observation window resonate at precisely 73.4 Hz. "Yes, I'm still here," she murmured, knowing that Vrel could detect her vocal vibrations through the glass. "And yes, I'm concerned about the Council's expectations too." The meridian's tissues pulsed, sending out a complex pattern that Lyra had come to associate with acknowledgement. More than acknowledgement, understanding. She picked up the specially designed interface glove from her workstation and slipped it over her right hand. The device, her own invention, translated tactile pressure into vibrational outputs at frequencies the meridians could interpret. It wasn't perfect. Trying to speak meridian with human technology was like trying to play Bach on a kazoo, but it was better than nothing. Lyra pressed her gloved palm against the window and tapped a simple pattern, connection question continuation. Vrel's response was immediate, their entire body contracted then expanded in a rippling wave, sending out harmonics that the sensors translated as, "Proceed together discovery." "I need to understand how you perceive emotional states," Lyra said aloud, simultaneously using the glove to transmit simplified vibrations. "The Council wants, they need to know if meaningful alliance is possible." The meridian's tissues formed an intricate spiral pattern, lights pulsing from edge to center in what Lyra had labeled as their contemplative formation. After several seconds, Vrel moved closer to the window, pressing what appeared to be their equivalent of a sensory organ against the barrier that separated them. The vibration that followed was so complex that the translation matrix struggled to interpret it. Finally, the system displayed, emotional states not separate from communication. Human division artificial. Will demonstrate if permitted. Lyra's heart rate quickened. Demonstrate how. Direct resonance sharing. Remove barrier. She stared at the translated text on her screen, then back at Vrel, whose body now pulsed with an azure luminescence she'd never observed before. You want me to enter the chamber? Without protective gear? She couldn't keep the apprehension from her voice. No harm intended. Understanding requires proximity. Lyra's scientific instincts warred with caution. The atmospheric composition within Vrel's chamber had been adjusted to accommodate meridian biology, slightly higher in nitrogen, with trace elements of xenon that gave the air a faintly sweet smell. It was breathable for humans, but not recommended for extended exposure. And yet, 6 months of observation from behind glass had yielded only fragments of understanding. Real comprehension might require something more. Decision made, Lyra pressed her palm to the interface panel beside the door, overriding the safety protocols with her research director clearance code. The airlock cycled with a pneumatic hiss, and she stepped into the antechamber. Dr. Okafor, this action violates Safety Protocol 7.3, the station's AI announced overhead. Please confirm override. Override confirmed, Lyra said, removing her lab coat. Record all sensory data at maximum resolution. Acknowledged. Please be advised that Commander Winters has been notified of the protocol breach. Lyra rolled her eyes. Of course he has. The inner door slid open, and she entered Vrel's chamber. The air felt heavier, almost gelatinous against her skin. The slight change in atmospheric pressure made her ears pop gently. But what struck her most was the sudden awareness of vibration, subtle tremors that seemed to pass through her body like gentle electricity. Vrel remained at the far side of the chamber, their membranes undulating slowly. Up close, without the barrier of reinforced glass, Lyra could see intricate details she'd missed in months of observation, microscopic filaments that extended from Vrel's outer tissues, constantly sampling the air, nodes of concentrated luminescence that pulsed in patterns too complex for her recording equipment to fully capture. Hello, she said softly, extending her gloved hand. Vrel's response was not what she expected. Instead of approaching, the meridian began to emit a low, rhythmic vibration that Lyra felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. It started in her feet, traveling upward through her body until it reached her chest, where it seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. Listen with body not ears, the translation matrix interpreted, the words appearing on her wrist display. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation. The vibration changed, becoming more complex, layering frequencies upon frequencies until she felt as though she were inside an orchestra rather than a laboratory chamber. And then, something shifted. It began as a tightness in her throat, followed by a wave of emotion that was distinctly not her own, curiosity mingled with patience, overlaid with something like joy, but deeper and more resonant than the human version of that emotion. When she opened her eyes, Vrel had moved closer, now hovering less than a meter away. The meridian's tissues pulsed with golden light. You perceive now, came the translation. Yes, Lyra whispered, overwhelmed by the sensation of emotion as a physical force. I feel, you. Not translation. Direct understanding. This is how we speak. It's beautiful, she said, tears forming unexpectedly. Like music and meaning becoming the same thing. Yes. Sound feeling thought unified. The chamber door hissed open behind her, and Commander Winters burst in with 2 security officers. Dr. Okafor, step away from the alien immediately, he ordered, his voice harsh in the delicate vibrational field that had formed between Lyra and Vrel. The sudden intrusion shattered the connection. Lyra felt it break like a physical pain, a discordant note in what had been perfect harmony. Vrel's membranes contracted defensively, their luminescence shifting to a deep indigo. You idiots, Lyra snapped, the loss of connection making her voice sharper than intended. We were communicating. Actually communicating, not just exchanging approximations. Winters gestured to the security officers. Escort Dr. Okafor to decontamination, then medical. I don't need medical, she protested as one of the officers took her arm. What I need is to continue this breakthrough without interruption. Protocol requires full examination after unauthorized alien contact, Winters said flatly. You know that. As she was led from the chamber, Lyra looked back at Vrel. The Meridian had retreated to the far wall, their form compressed into what she recognized as a protective posture. But just before the door closed, Vrel emitted a brief pulse of vibration that bypassed her ears entirely and seemed to touch her mind directly. The translation matrix didn't catch it, but Lyra didn't need technology to understand the message, "Will continue when safe." 3 days of mandatory isolation gave Lyra plenty of time to contemplate her experience, and to plan her next move. Medical found nothing abnormal in her scans, though the neurologist noted unusual activity in her auditory cortex that persisted for hours after the encounter. When Commander Winters finally came to her quarters, his expression was a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "The Council has reviewed your report," he said, standing awkwardly in her doorway. "They're impressed with the breakthrough, despite the protocol violations." Lyra looked up from her notes. And they've authorized continued direct contact, under controlled conditions." He handed her a tablet. "New protocols. More safety measures. A team of observers." She scanned the document and frowned. These restrictions would make real communication impossible. The vibrations require proximity and privacy. Too many human minds in the space creates interference. It's this or nothing, Lyra. You're lucky they didn't shut down the entire project after your stunt. She handed the tablet back to him. "Tell them I need to demonstrate why these restrictions won't work. One more session, my way. They can observe remotely." Winters looked like he might argue, then shrugged. "One session. Then it's by the book or it's over." When Lyra entered Vrel's chamber the next day, the Meridian seemed to brighten at her presence, their tissues expanding in what she now recognized as a greeting display. "I don't have much time," she said, removing the monitoring devices the medical team had insisted she wear. "But I need to understand something before they restrict our interactions." Vrel rippled acknowledgement, moving closer than they had during their first encounter. The vibrations began immediately, more focused this time, as if the Meridian had been practicing how to communicate more efficiently with her limited human perceptions. Question anticipated, came the translation, though Lyra was beginning to understand the patterns directly, without technological interpretation. "Your species has been on this moon for centuries," she said. "Yet you've never reached out to any other civilization until now. Why contact humans? Why agree to this research station?" The answer came not in words but in a sequence of emotions that flowed through her like water: curiosity, then caution, then something like recognition, and finally, urgency. Images formed in Lyra's mind, not visual pictures but conceptual impressions, vast networks of vibration spanning the void between stars, patterns disrupted by new frequencies, ancient harmonies suddenly complicated by unfamiliar notes. "You sensed our presence," she whispered, understanding dawning. "Our communications, our ships, they changed something." "Yes. Human vibrations awaken old patterns. Dormant entities now listening." The same phrase triggered a memory. "Entities? Like the ones the Spira mentioned to the diplomatic mission last year?" Vrel's response was immediate and strong enough to make Lyra's teeth ache: connected awareness correct. Spira perceive through light. We perceive through vibration. Same danger, different sense. What danger? What entities? Instead of answering directly, Vrel extended filaments toward Lyra's face, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the electrical field they generated. Without warning, a new vibration began, this one dissonant and deeply unsettling. It resonated at a frequency that made her skull feel like it might crack, her vision blurring at the edges. In that moment of discomfort, she perceived something vast and ancient and utterly alien, a presence that existed in the spaces between conventional matter, that perceived reality as patterns of vibration rather than physical objects. A presence that had been dormant for millennia, but was now stirring, awakened by the cacophony of human expansion through space. The connection broke abruptly, leaving Lyra gasping. That's what you sense approaching?" she managed to ask. "Not approaching. Already here. Watching. Deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether harmony possible. Or whether silence required." The implications chilled her. "Silence, you mean elimination? Of us? Not intentional malice. Matter of vibration incompatibility. Your species disrupts ancient harmonies unknowingly. And you're trying to, what? Help us adjust our vibrations? Teach us to exist without disturbing these entities?" Vrel's tissues contracted in what Lyra had come to recognize as their equivalent of affirmation. "Yes. Alternative is correction by others. Less gentle. Permanent." Lyra paced the chamber, mind racing. "This is why the Spira suddenly initiated contact after ignoring us for centuries. And why your people agreed to this research station. You're both trying to, what, help us avoid cosmic noise complaints. Simplistic but accurate. Many species aware. Few willing to intervene. Easier to let pattern resolve naturally." "Naturally meaning our extinction," Lyra translated grimly. "Unless adaptation occurs. Resonance harmony achieved." She stopped pacing. "And that's what you're offering to teach me? How humans can adjust to avoid cosmic dissonance?" Vrel's entire form brightened, pulsing with what Lyra could only interpret as hope. "Yes. Beginning with you. Vibration teacher. Bridge between frequencies." The realization of what Vrel was proposing struck her with full force. They weren't just suggesting cultural exchange or diplomatic relations. They were offering to teach her how to fundamentally alter human interaction with the universe itself, to help her species learn to exist in harmony with forces they hadn't even known were listening. "The Council won't understand this," she said softly. "Not without experiencing it themselves. Understanding comes slowly. First one mind. Then another. Resonance spreads." Lyra looked at the observation window, where she knew Winters and the others were watching, probably bewildered by the conversation they could only partially monitor. "I'll be their bridge," she said, both to Vrel and to her unseen observers. "But I'll need time. And freedom to work without interference." Vrel's response came not as vibration this time, but as a gentle pressure against her consciousness, a feeling of agreement, of partnership, of shared purpose that transcended the limitations of their different biologies. As she stood there, experiencing communication in its purest form, Lyra understood that she was no longer just a xenolinguist studying an alien species. She had become something new, a translator not just of language, but of existence itself. And in the vast, vibrating cosmos, where ancient intelligences stirred from slumber, awakened by humanity's unknowing discordance, perhaps that translation would make all the difference. The Symphony of Dust. Captain Josephine Reed had crashed on 7 different planets in her 16-year career with the Frontier Survey Corps. She had a talent for keeping her crew alive when ships went down, which was why they kept promoting her despite what the Admiralty called her aggressive approach to emergency landings. But this crash was different. This time, the planet wasn't supposed to exist. "Damage report," she called, pulling herself from the pilot's seat as acrid smoke filled the bridge of the survey vessel Pathfinder. Lieutenant Dawes coughed into his sleeve, waving his hand through the holographic readout. "Life support at 60%, engines completely offline, comms array sheared off during entry." "And we're definitely not where we're supposed to be," said Navigator Tenzin, staring at the planetary charts. "According to every official star map, this system is empty. No planets. No asteroids. Nothing." Josephine moved to the viewport, now cracked but intact enough to show her the landscape beyond. Rolling hills of what looked like purple moss stretched toward a distant mountain range. The sky above was a deep amber, cloudless except for a thin haze that gave the sunlight a filtered quality. "Well, it's definitely something," she muttered. "And we're definitely on it." The emergency landing, Josephine refused to call it a crash, had been precipitated by an anomaly in the void. One moment they were cruising through empty space on a routine survey mission, the next their sensors had detected a massive gravitational distortion directly ahead. Before Tenzin could plot a course correction, they'd been pulled toward an apparently non-existent planet. A planet that, upon closer examination, appeared to be actively trying to hide itself. "It's like it has some kind of perceptual camouflage," Tenzin had said just before impact, his voice filled with wonder rather than terror. "The readings keep shifting, trying to convince our systems there's nothing here." Now, as Josephine strapped on her sidearm and prepared to lead the first expedition outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled on something they weren't meant to find. "Standard protocols," she told the 6-person team assembled in the airlock. "Full environmental suits until we confirm atmospheric composition. No biological sampling without clearance. And nobody, absolutely nobody, goes anywhere alone." The team nodded, faces serious behind their helmet visors. They all knew the Corps' statistics on uncharted planets. 40% of survey teams encountered hostile environmental conditions. 30% discovered aggressive fauna. 10% never returned at all. The airlock cycled open, and Josephine stepped onto the surface of the nameless world. The ground gave slightly beneath her boots, the purple moss-like vegetation compressing and then springing back. The air readings on her suit's display gradually shifted from red to yellow, not immediately toxic, but not confirmed safe either. "Fan out," she ordered. "Standard perimeter sweep. Looking for water, shelter, and anything that might want to eat us." She had just taken her 10th step when she saw it, a shimmer in the air about 20 meters ahead, like heat rising from scorched earth. But this shimmer had structure, deliberate motion. It moved toward her with purpose. "Contact," she said sharply into her comm, unknown entity approaching from the northwest. "Hold positions." The shimmer stopped, hovering just at the edge of clear visibility. Then, with a ripple that reminded Josephine of silk catching the wind, it resolved into a humanoid form, tall and slender, with limbs that seemed slightly too long for its torso. Its skin, if it could be called that, resembled beaten copper that had been weathered by centuries of exposure. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface. Josephine slowly raised her empty hands, palms forward, the universal gesture of peaceful intent. "We mean no harm," she said clearly, though she doubted the being could understand Earth standard. "Our ship was damaged. We need help." The copper-skinned figure tilted its head, a gesture so unexpectedly human that Josephine felt a momentary surge of hope. Then the being raised its own hand, 6-fingered, she noted, and pointed directly at her chest. A wave of emotion washed over her, curiosity, caution, and something that felt like recognition. These weren't her emotions, she realized with a start. They were being projected at her. And more strangely, she could see them, tendrils of color that emerged from the being's form and drifted toward her like pollen on a breeze. Blue-green curiosity. Amber caution. Silver recognition. "Captain." Lieutenant Dawes' voice crackled in her earpiece. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" "If you mean the colors in the air, then yes," she replied, not taking her eyes off the being. "And I think it's trying to communicate." The being extended its hand further, and a new color emerged, a deep purple that felt like an invitation. Without fully understanding why, Josephine found herself removing her helmet. The air that filled her lungs was thick and sweet, like breathing through honey. "Captain Reed." Tenzin's alarmed voice came from behind her. "Protocol states." "I know what protocol states," she interrupted, still watching the colors swirl around her. "But I also know when to adapt to unexpected situations." The being moved closer, its copper skin catching the amber light. Now that it stood just meters away, Josephine could see that its featureless face wasn't featureless at all, there were subtle ridges and depressions, patterns that shifted like sand dunes in a gentle wind. And the colors, they weren't just coming from the being. They were emerging from her as well. A rich red emanated from her chest, tendrils reaching toward the alien. She somehow knew this was her curiosity, her caution, her determination. "Who are you?" she asked, though she already sensed that verbal language was largely irrelevant here. The being's response came as a flood of color and emotion, too complex to fully interpret, but carrying impressions of age, of patience, of guardianship. And beneath it all, a sense of warning. "I am Earith," came a voice that wasn't a voice, more like the concept of identity forming directly in her mind. "Watcher of the hidden path. You should not be here. None should be here." Josephine felt her team tense behind her, hands moving toward weapons. She made a small gesture, "Stand down." "We didn't intend to come here," she explained. "Our ship was caught in some kind of gravitational anomaly." The veil failed, Earith's thoughts conveyed. "It weakens as the resonance grows stronger." That word, resonance, triggered something in Josephine's memory. Reports she'd read, classified briefings about the Sphiran diplomatic mission and Dr. Okafor's work with the Meridians. Both species had mentioned resonance patterns, vibrations that humans created unknowingly. "You're talking about human expansion," she said, realization dawning. "The way we, what? Disrupt something?" Colors shifted around Earith, deep blues and violets that carried sorrow and affirmation. "Your kind broadcasts emotions across the void," the being explained. "Uncontrolled. Unfiltered. The colors of your feeling states penetrate barriers that have stood for eons. And that's bad. It awakens those who perceive. Ancient ones who feed on emotional energy. Who once nearly consumed all sentient life in this galaxy." More pieces connected in Josephine's mind. This wasn't coincidence. First the Sphira, then the Meridians, now these beings, the Thorans, if she had to guess, based on the emotional projection abilities described in old xenoanthropological texts. 3 different species, all suddenly concerned with human emotional output. "Your world is hidden," she said. "Cloaked somehow from detection." "This is the sanctuary," Earith confirmed. "Last refuge of those who survived the feeding. We maintain the veil that conceals us from physical and emotional detection." Around them, more Thorans had appeared, dozens now, emerging from invisibility, their copper skin gleaming. Colors swirled between them in complex patterns that Josephine could somehow read as conversation, debate, concern.